You ready, Jill? All right. We've all heard stories of people that have sacrificed themselves, their lives, to save other people. Military people, soldiers have done that. That's what Purple Hearts and Medal of Honors are about. There are first responders and medical people, firemen and policemen that have sacrificed their lives to save someone. There are parents that have taken life-risking action in order to save their children. I got a couple of quick stories I'll tell you. I don't know if you remember, it was in the news not long ago. There was a airline crash several years ago. Everyone on the plane was killed except one person, and it was a child. I think the child was, 7 or 8 years old. It was a girl. And before the crash, this little girl's mom got out of her seat and her daughter was sitting in the seat. She got and faced her daughter and covered herself over her child and buckled herself in, and that little girl was the only one that was saved. Isn't that amazing? That she had that courage to do that and was determined to do everything she could to save that little girl. And another story I've got is I heard Friday, back in World War II, there was a young man, a boy, really, 14 years old. He lied about his age, went down to the Marine Corps. This is World War II, they're drafting people, needing soldiers to go fight. He convinces the Marine Corps recruit guy that he's old enough. Kid was 14 years old. So he sent him to boot camp and do the whole 9 yards, and he gets assigned to a battalion, and all that. But somehow they discovered that he's underage, he's 14. And they said, okay, here's the deal. Probably out of not being embarrassed, they said, we're not gonna send you home, you're just gonna be, assigned to do certain things. And when his battalion shipped out, they said, you can't go. Well, he went anyway, because he stowed away in secret on the ship. Now, this is a 14-year-old. And some of his buddies knew it. So they were bringing him food in secret. And when they landed, he was one of the Marines that landed on Iwo Jima. And the story is that they got into a grenade launching a fight with the Japanese. And this boy was fast enough, when the Japanese would throw the grenades, he'd run, get them, and throw them back at them. Now you imagine. And then one of them, he knew he ran out of time. He knew it was going to go, so he fell on it. And it exploded, and they left him for dead. They came back to look after the dead. The boy was still alive. And what happened was, the way he fell, the blast sort of went by him on like his side. I think the story I got was he had multiple surgeries, but they saved him, which is probably unusual as a doctor at that time. But somehow they got him all patched back up, sent him back home. He goes back to high school, shows back up in high school a year and a half or 2 years later, wearing his Medal of Honor in high school. Can you imagine? But the sacrifice he made that day to make that judgment that, I'll do something about this, So I'm asking you that, I'm telling you that to pose this question. Was the death of Jesus on the cross really that unique? Was it unique? From the Roman world, from the standpoint of Rome, a crucifixion was not a unique thing. It was the most common way to execute the hardened criminal. The murderers, or sometimes even political enemies, were executed by crucifixion. They determined that it was the most cruel and painful way to kill somebody and execute them, so that's what they developed it really well. The intent was not for you to die, but for you to die really over a period of days from exposure, if nothing else. It was a very painful experience. Before they put you on the cross, they dislocated all of your arms and legs so that you had no control of your body. They had it all figured out. Death by crucifixion was slow, as I said, and they used it to control the population. You think about our executions are not public. There are people that make and go, but it's done inside a jail, inside a room. It's not like broadcast on national TV. But for the Romans, it was exactly the opposite. They wanted you to see somebody being executed. It was important. Why? A way to control and to put fear into people that if you break the law, if you go against Rome, you're subject to being, this may happen to you. An example of that to give you is, remember probably the old years ago, the movie Spartacus. And I remember watching that when I was a kid. Well, he was a rebel, and he led a revolution against Rome. He was a Trajan gladiator. So he raised an army, but he was defeated, and he was actually killed in battle. They killed him, but the Roman general Crassus decided to make an example of his army. 6,000 soldiers were executed by crucifixion on the Appian Way, lined up down the Appian Way, which is the most traveled road in Rome. What was he making a statement out? If you're going to revolt against Rome, here's what happens to you and everybody you know. Putting that in light, was it, again, my question is, was it unique? Well, obviously from you and I, from our standpoint as Christians, the short answer is yes, it was. First, he was an innocent man. And secondly, the long answer would be, it's the very essence of what? The gospel. There had to be the crucifixion of Jesus for the gospel to mean what it does to you and I today. It's the most important thing that Jesus accomplished. Hanging on a cross. You think about it, he taught, he healed people, he told beautiful parables, he raised up some disciples, he even raised people from the dead. But they pale in comparison to him going to the cross and dying. There's no comparison to that. That was his purpose. And the reason it's so important is obvious that it atoned for our sin, my sin, your sin. That sacrifice was necessary to save us from spiritual death. And he was the only one capable of doing it. Our lesson text today is found in Luke 23. And I want to read the verses. I'll go through those out of respect for what the words are, and then we'll just sort of flash back through them. It's in Luke 23, I'll begin with verse 26. This is a little bit more than the lesson in the books, but I want you to see a bigger picture. In 26 it says, as they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Verse 31. For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? It amazed me that Jesus, on the way, and everything that's happened to him, he tells a proverb. Just think of it, it's just amazing to me. It speaks, I think, of the control he had. He was doing everything with absolute clarity and purpose. There was a reason for everything he did. On verse 32, 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was written a notice above him which read, this is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what we deserve, our deeds deserve. but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, I'll tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. Typically for someone condemned to die in that time, they were all required to carry their cross. It was only the cross beam, though. It wasn't like in some movies, this big giant cross with you trailing it down. It would be the beam that your hands are placed on. And many times, though, they couldn't carry it because of the beatings. It was very common for someone to be condemned to die to be beaten. And Jesus, and if you read the other Gospels, was beaten severely, more than once. And just imagine after a while, and he's been up, no sleep for how long? So the fatigue is in no way he could possibly do that. And we think about, it's hard to understand it. I've got a book that shows some pictures of some of the ideas about where Jesus had to walk. And one of them was about the area that you walk in. They are able to identify it to some degree even today. It'd go by a slaughterhouse where there'd be a lot of blood, where they would have animals out to sell. In narrow streets, there were crowds of people. Just imagine, it was quite an event to get from the temple area and the house of the Sanhedrin, or even from Pilate's area and all that, to get out there. But it was a tough climb to do that. So it was a very strenuous thing to do. And in Jesus' case, you see, he's not able to do it. So a Roman soldier had the right to engage anybody to provide service for him. If Roman soldiers moved into a village and they needed a place to sleep at night, they could come knock on your door and say, make room, we're coming in. And so this centurion obviously said, grabbed Simon and said, carry it. Here's Simon, who was obviously a Jew. The word Simon was a very popular name, and it says he's from Cyrene. Anybody know where that is today? It's the modern country of Libya. And in that time, there were a lot of Jewish people that lived in Libya. So the Passover, you can imagine this exodus and this traveling people probably going together, caravans of them, trying to get to Jerusalem. And it says he came from the country. It means wherever he was staying during the Passover, he's coming in to go worship. And then all of a sudden, he's engaged to carry this cross. I want to give you a scenario right quick of what happens. It talks about the crowds. I read some history about it. There was actually a society of benevolent women in Jerusalem. And when there was an execution, they would go. And they would bring a mix of drugged wine to give to the people that are going to be crucified so that it would dull their pain. You get it? And that's what they thought. It was a way to serve those that were being tortured in a way. And that was a group of the women there. It also talks about there were a group of women that wailed. Roman law said if somebody's condemned to die, the only time you can mourn is up to the point of death. As soon as that person died, it was against Roman law to mourn publicly for that person. You could be arrested. In other words, when he's dead, it's done. You move on. Interesting, isn't it? That they felt that way. So you have these professional mourners, or women that would mourn in sympathy for these people about to die, and sometimes there was no one else there to mourn for them, so that would be something that they would do. You see there what Jesus said, what do you make of? Why did Jesus tell them, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves, in verses 27. We're in chapter 23. Oh, you got it? Why did Jesus say, don't worry about weeping for me? It was prophecy. Less than 30 years later, Rome, same people executing Jesus, would surround Jerusalem, and because the Jews revolted, and would put siege to Jerusalem for 5 years. It went on. And if you read the history, at that point in time, it got so bad inside the walls of Jerusalem that mothers were slaughtering their own children and eating them. That's how bad it was. Can you imagine if you had 8 kids, you decide which one goes? And that's why Jesus said, weep for yourselves and your children. You're going to wish you had never had a child. Can you imagine? So he was actually prophecy that here's what's coming for you. You need to understand. And then he said, you see that in verse 31, that proverb, it says, For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry? What does he say? It's this take. Jesus said, if Rome will kill an innocent man, in other words, when the tree is green, when it's alive, it's healthy, it's innocent, what do you think Rome will do to people that really revolt? And it's tied to what Jesus saw coming for Jerusalem, that you don't understand how violent Rome's going to be to you when you revolt. And here, you don't weep for me as an innocent man. I'm innocent and I'm going to be crucified, but you don't know what's coming. And Rome's going to put a hammer down on you. It's just amazing to me that Jesus is got this mindset as he's marching to this crucifixion. Who did Jesus forgive? It says there in 34 and 33, I think, Jesus said, forgive them because they do not know what they're doing. Who was he asking for forgiveness for? Was it the Roman soldiers for pounding the spikes in him or being cruel? Was it the Jewish religious leadership? They were out there too. They were like, we won. We got him. We're going to have him nailed on a cross. He's going to be gone. We're done with him. Was he asking for forgiveness for them? Was it forgiveness for all those other people that were mocking him and taunting him to come down? One commentator said, or was it for all of them? He said maybe Jesus was putting into practice what he taught the disciples, teaching them the hard reality that he was trying to convey to them to forgive one's enemies. Now listen, if you're about to have me shot, I'm not sure I'm going to be in a mindset to forgive you. But here Jesus is going to the bitter end, is saying, I'm going to stand by what I believe. God, forgive them. They don't have a clue what they're doing. They don't understand who I am or what this is all about. And another commentator said it just shows you the extent of where God will go because of the love he has for people, his creation. In 35 through 39, it identifies 4 groups of people who taunted Jesus. You had the people, some of the people that stood watching. Now, some of those people were there were friends they were just in awe, probably in shock. There was nothing they could really do. They were supporters of Jesus in some ways, but it was out of their hands. There were the soldiers, they taunted. There were the leaders, as I just mentioned ago, and then there were the 2 criminals. 3 of these 4 groups of people taunted him. My question to you is, was it ever possible for Jesus just to simply say, okay, enough? They were asking him and taunting him to come off the cross. Could he have come off? Absolutely. He's God. What if God had said, you people are not worth saving? You ever had to deal with somebody you're like, I just wish they'd get out of my life. I don't ever want to see them again. Well, God was in the flesh at that point in time. He had these human emotions. He could have said, I'm done. All right, this is far enough. These people are not worth saving. We'll start all over. Remember, that was the threat that God made to Moses. When he was talking about the Israelites, he said, they are stubborn, stiff-necked, hard-headed people. I'm done with them. I'll get another group. And Moses said, oh, no, God, no, you can't do that. It would be against your name and how great you are and all those kinds. You know, what was God? Challenging Moses, wasn't he? More than he was anything else. But the reason he didn't, the reason he stayed on the cross is why? That's why he came. That was his mission. And I think it goes back to how much he loves people and wanted to save us from our own spiritual death. One of the criminals, and both of them, if you read the other Gospels, both of them taunted Jesus at some point in time. One of them decided to just go to death with anger and taunting Jesus. The other one did what? Said, Lord, I get it. Now you imagine, sort of like this last second salvation. Was it any less important than yours and mine? And I think he had to have known something about Jesus, because Jesus is going to die on a cross just like him. So how did he figure out that there's something to him? There's something to his message. He had to know something for him to say, Lord, he had to believe also that there was going to be something more than Jesus dying. He understood that wherever Jesus was going, it was someplace he could go. And so that's why he believed. Jesus didn't have a key. You don't have a kingdom hanging on a cross. But this man said, I want to be wherever that kingdom is with you. And Jesus said, so be it. Why was that so important? I think it's the essence of the gospel. Just think how easy it is for you and I to decide that somebody's not good, not worthy, not quite as good as my family, or not good people. Well, how good a person was that guy hanging on that cross? And what did Jesus promise him? Hey, you're going to be with me. So think about it when I judge somebody and sort of put them in a category that they might not be worth anything. I think Jesus sees it differently. There's no one not worth being what? Brought into the kingdom of God if they'll just believe. That's all it took it was just an act of faith by this man. That's all it ever was. He showed this amazing understanding of who Jesus was and what the potentials were. And as I said, it was the heart of the gospel. The salvation is by faith alone. Now, you see there, I'm going to close in verses 44 through 46. I'm going to read them quickly again. It's about the 6th hour. Darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. For the sun stopped shining, which is an example of God saying this is the epitome of sin. It took God to sacrifice himself for sin to be dealt with. So God, and I checked, there's no historical evidence that there was an eclipse or anything. Exactly how it became dark, I don't know. And it says dark over the land. I think it was dark in that area. I don't think it implies that the whole world was dark necessarily. You know, if God can raise people from the dead, he can certainly make it dark from one area. I mean, not a big deal. And anyways, for the sun stopped shining and the curtain of the temple was torn, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. When he had said this, he breathed his last breath. Two things I want you to see there. Three things. One, Jesus died, according to the scriptures, about 3 o'clock that afternoon. That's right about the time of the evening sacrifice at the temple. You get it? This is God's sacrifice. Actually, it meant you didn't need to do that anymore. Going to the temple and giving a sacrifice didn't mean anything anymore. It was over. That was the last one that needed to be made. The other things I want you to see, it was Jesus acted out to the very end with obedience and trust in the plan that he had, that God had. Just think about how many times you and I make plans and we all of a sudden we get to a point like, Jesus, it's going to work. Have I made a mistake, or am I going in the right direction? Have I made the right decision? But it was obvious that Jesus was determined for this to be done to the very end, and it had to be voluntary. You see there, it says he just gave it up. I've read that a couple of times, and I've been off I would be by myself and I say, okay, how does it feel to just say, this is I'm going to die now? You just take a breath and you go. What would that feel like? To have that kind of power, you can say, okay, I'm ready to go. That's it. That might be cool, isn't it? Sort of. Then I might change my mind at the last second. I don't know. But Jesus had that power to do that. If you had to describe the importance, this is important for you and I to be able to explain this, I think, to people that ask, that may not know about the Lord. Can you explain the crucifixion to somebody that didn't know about it? Can you tell them what it means and why it's important? That's really important, I think, for you and I as believers. That doesn't mean you walk around with a sign trying to do things that are out of place or not in the right situation. But when those times come, we ought to be able to what? The Bible says we ought to be able to explain what we believe. And I think it's really important. In John 19:30, Jesus said, "It is finished." And that literally means in Hebrew, it is finished and it stands finished. In other words, God doesn't have to do anything else to save man, other than man to accept it. It was done. Everything that was done was completed. It's sort of like if you have a mortgage, the last thing the greatest things about the end of a mortgage is a letter that comes from the bank that says you're paid in full. Listen, I celebrated when I got mine that I don't owe them any more money. The house is ours. It was just that's what Jesus is saying. Look, the debt's been paid. I've done it. It's all paid in full. It's reconciled. The books have been balanced. What's that Greek word? You may remember the word that's used in the Greek. Telestai, telestai, which means it's finished. If I was going to get a tattoo, I think I'd put that on there, but I'm not that brave. I don't want the pain. All right, I want us to finish. I want to close. I was talking earlier about how easy it is to not forgive someone or be really troubled about someone and be angry at them. I found this in a devotion. It says this, and it's a very short poem written by American poet Edwin Markham, and talking about forgiving people. And that's a part of the lesson too. You think about Jesus was willing to forgive these people. He wrote this poem, he said, talking about someone else. He said, he drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flaunt. But love and I had wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Isn't that the attitude you and I ought to have as a Christian? That despite somebody hating us, we try to keep them in a circle just like the Lord did. He never gives up on people, and neither should we. Y'all have a great week.